Welcome back to Kitco News. I'm Jeremy Szafron. Well, today's guests help ignite the national movement around sound money, limited government, and individual liberty, decades before these ideas returned to the center of political debate. And as gold surges past $3,100 an ounce, its strongest quarter since 1986, and calls to audit Fort Knox trend across social media, Americans are asking deeper questions about trust, transparency, and the future of the U.S. dollar. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's government downsizing experiment known as DOGE faces both constitutional scrutiny and public backlash, and the Federal Reserve remains under fire as inflation risks continue to mount. To break it all down, we're joined by someone who's been ahead of the curve for over 40 years, former Congressman and presidential candidate, founder of the Ron Paul Institute and host of the Liberty Report, Dr. Ron Paul. Welcome back to the show, Dr. Paul. Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be with you.
Well, listen, Dr. Paul, as you know, gold just topped $3,100 an ounce after its best quarter in nearly 40 years. Central banks are buying, the dollar seems to be wobbling, and Americans are watching inflation eat away at their savings. Is this the moment sound money finally goes mainstream?
It certainly looks like it, but we don't know exactly what mainstream means. This might be the beginning of the end of a whole currency and a reserve system that we've been living with, half-heartedly, for a long time, especially since World War II. Mm-hmm. So, no, it's, I think the mainstream is getting noticed. They're noticing this, but it's unknown. I can recall not too many years ago, though, the gold went up a bit, then it went down to $1,000. And when in 2016, I think it was looking like, to me, I thought it was 2016, and I thought we were going into another bull market. Mm-hmm. Even though I've watched this since gold was $35 an ounce, it still is sort of shocking. Even though I think, well, why should you be shocked? I'm not shocked, but to talk about $3,000 an ounce of gold when I hold up my gold pieces I bought, for about $40 or so, it's just amazing. Mm-hmm. Even though those predictions were available to. As a matter of fact, I got involved when I ran across some Austrian economists who were writing about this in the 1960s, and they predicted that Bretton Woods agreement would break down. Mm-hmm. We're wasting and spending too much money and giving it away. And sure enough, that is what happened. And that was a big date in my understanding of 1971 in August that, the gold window was closed. And look at what's happened since then. I think it's going to continue. And the longer it continues, the more people will be joining us.
Mm-hmm. On the macro front, Dr. Paul, let's get your take on why gold is seeing such a historical moment right now. And where do you think it's heading next?
Well, I think that nobody knows exactly, because sometimes I think, well, this is the takeoff forever and we're going to have, Zimbabwe and have Venezuela. And it doesn't happen. And I think that because there's a subjective element in there. But what I look at, if I wonder, well, let's say next month we have a correction that is far beyond than the people who thought the bulls on this is going up forever and the dollar's going to zero and all of this, and then they may be shocked. But I think that could happen, but it's totally unknown. But the thing that I watch to find out when I think, well, maybe it is going to end or something, I look at deficit financing. I think that is the biggest thing. The supply of money and the supply of credit for our evil foreign policy and our wicked domestic policy, our welfare state, and all the special interests that go, and the people demanding more and more. We make an effort, and Trump's trying to make an effort. He's getting a lot of grief over that, of cutting anything. So, Leonard Reed, a favorite of mine in the past, he says, everybody wants to balance the budget, but they all have a but. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing now. There's a lot of buts out there, and they're going to rally together. So that makes it more difficult. But the deficit is the ultimate tool. And even though Barry Goldwater and the rest talked about this, no calamity occurred. But the handwriting on the wall occurred in August 15th, 1971. And it's been there. And the handwriting is getting bigger and bigger, because how much longer can the whole system tolerate $36 trillion of debt? And this, even with this serious effort to cut back, I'm not expecting miracles to come up with a balanced budget next year.
Yeah, well said. And of course, we'll be continuing to talk about DOGE in just a minute. Before we do, I want to ask you, Dr. Paul, given your extensive experience and non-interventionalist perspective on foreign policy, I'd like to get your take on two major geopolitical flashpoints. Between the possibility of U.S. attacking Iran amid tensions over its nuclear program and regional influence, and China potentially invading Taiwan, which do you see as the bigger global risk here for stability?
Well, I think they're all a risk because they aren't part of our supposedly tradition. They're not part of our Constitution. But right now, the big ones, the Middle East, are coming up with these assumptions. Oh, well, I think what we ought to do is just take over Greenland. There's a limit to that, but that could lead to problems too. But I think right now, Yemen and Iran, the way we're treating them, and yet that doesn't sound to me like we're stopping wars and getting and not starting any new ones. We are aggravating. I think we have a terrible policy with the Iranians. They're not. They're not going to be perfect citizens, according to a lot of Americans. But I tell you what, I think that I happen to believe the issue because of the investigations that are going in. I think that they have the brains not to have a nuclear weapon over there. And yet that's what we dwell on, and that's what we concentrate on. And I don't like the warnings that are going on and the advisors that are giving the president advice right now, especially in the area of Yemen and the Middle East, as well as Iran.
Now, the U.S. Bloomberg's Global Trade Policy Uncertainty Index soared to its highest level since records began back in 2009. And you posted on X recently saying that, quote, with tariffs, we run into the same unsolvable problem that we have with the Federal Reserve. The Fed doesn't know what interest rates should be. It's all arbitrary, in the same way that the president doesn't know what the price of cars or lumber or any other product should be. How do you see tariffs and all these geopolitical tensions playing out as we enter the second quarter of 2025? What are you watching most closely here?
Well, the economy I like is what we refer to as a non-interventionist economy, and a laissez-faire as far as I'm concerned. But once they start manipulating and they believe in interventionism, both major parties and most people believe in some interventionism. But that I worry about that because that's endorsing the principle. So if you introduce the principle of a little bit of inflation, a little bit of a dilution away from the definition of your currency, it leads to big trouble. How about a small little income tax? Oh, 1%, 2%, 3%, no big deal. And it just grows and grows. So it's the principle that we accept. And we accept the idea of interventionism. And therefore, all of a sudden, I imagine there's a level of tariffs, competition that you could get by with for a while, but eventually people depend on it. They want to cover their bases, and then we hear stories. Well, we're going to collect a lot of money here, on tariffs, and maybe we can get rid of the income tax. I don't happen to believe that. That's not going to happen because they're not stopping the spending. The people want spending. The special interests want the spending. The military-industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, the recipients of Social Security. It's on and on. So the odds of that being cut back are very slim, although I give a lot of credit to the group now trying to cut back because the information we've gotten about USAID, it's fantastic. It's waking up some people, but it's not the solution. We have to not tinker around the edges, and we have to do it now. Right away, there's tremendous resistance to the effort made in the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. So I think we have a long way to go, and it's not going to do it because I work on the assumption that all the debt and all the malinvestment eventually has to be liquidated because it's all fake. And you can't just pile debt on debt. But not too many people talk about malinvestment. You know, the debt goes up and is spent the wrong way and it introduces all these government programs. But there's also people who just inadvertently, the interest rates are 4%. They're not 6% anymore. Oh, it's a good time to invest. Well, that's false information. So that's how you get your bubbles. And I think the system is built in, and we've gotten away with it by covering it over these bubbles that want to clear the area to close, cover them with more inflation. Yeah. We didn't lower the interest rates quite enough. So they just go on and on with intervention. The principle is interventionism, and the opposite of that is non-intervention. And we don't want authoritarians tell us how to live.
Yeah, well said. And we're also seeing rising interest in alternatives to the dollar. I mean, from gold and Bitcoin to the resistance behind CBDCs, are Americans quietly rejecting the system? And what does that mean for everyday savers?
Well, they're rejecting it because they're very angry, and that's good and healthy. But it depends on what they want to do. When I was still in office, and that's not too long ago, we always have had some inflation. So if somebody comes in and there's a spell of price inflation, I would have people come and say, this is terrible. This inflation is bad. But they weren't very open to my suggestion of where it comes from, the printing press. They say, what we need and we want you to help us do is get more money.
They definitely have to get bigger. Okay, you talked a little bit about DOGE there. I mean, President Trump says that DOGE may end soon as Musk plans to step down in May. And to clarify to our viewers, Elon Musk's role as a special government employee means he's limited to just 130 days of federal service per calendar year. This kind of appointment is usually reserved for advisors brought in on short-term projects. Musk's current tenure is set to expire in late May unless it's reauthorized under a different title. Meanwhile, DOGE, the initiative itself, is scheduled to sunset on July 4th, according to the executive order. Dr. Paul, how do you view this entire experiment? Was it a step in the right direction towards smaller government?
Well, a feeble step. I think there's an effort and a demand, and a lot of people are hopeful. But I don't have a lot of optimism to say they're really on the right track and we're going to see real cuts. Some of these proposals, they don't get into the budget. You don't see any slashing of the budget. They can't even pass the budget. They're waiting another month or two to hope they can pass, the next budget. So, no, the atmosphere is still there. And I think it's a contest between the people that are surviving. But unfortunately, the people who are surviving are pretty well to do. And the unfortunate thing, whether it's tariffs or taxes or inflation, it's the poor and the middle class that get wiped out. And yes, they want to stop. But they're not sophisticated enough and say, well, it all has to do with the Federal Reserve. If we just could audit the Federal Reserve, we would do something about the Federal Reserve because that's where the problem comes from. That's where the inflation starts. But that's a bigger task than just saying prices are high or there's a tariff we can put on. We need to protect our car industry and all and all. That's a lot of tinkering that almost always escalates into serious problems. The founders warned us that if you do too much of that, you're going to have a hot war, not just a tariff war. It's an interference. It's the rejection of freedom, and it's a rejection of the confidence we have as a people that less government is far superior to the amount of government we already have. And the majority of the people, I think, believe that. But getting there is a different story, and that's where I come down on saying there will be liquidation, there's going to be big problems, and I work on the effort of trying to provide the answers to it. The cultural Marxists, they love it because they want riots and they want chaos in the streets because they believe that's good and they want to replace it. Well, I don't. The way I see it, yes, it's probably going to happen. I don't argue with them, but what are we going to replace it with? And I see signs that the movement to replace it with a much more sane government, something more like what the founders, proposed. There's an element there. That's where I see growth. That's where I see individuals. That's where I see in the homeschooling groups and private schools and people waking up. They woke up on about COVID, and they woke up about things like USAID. A lot of people know about the atrocious and evil spending, stole all that money. People need to talk about stealing and then giving it to special interests more so that people know what's going on and not just say, well, the government needs to spend more money.
Yeah. Dr. Paul, if Thomas Jefferson were alive today and he saw the Federal Reserve and this digital fiat, the abandonment of the gold, what do you think he'd say?
Well, he did say something about that. He thought we should have, it would look like, due to human nature, that we'd have to have a revolution, violent, every 20 years. Well, he'd say it's overdue. The way you guys are going, it looks like you're working real hard to bring it on. He'd be discouraged, though, because he might have been saying that tongue in cheek. But anyway, yes, it's going to lead to problem. But he would say it's hard to believe. Today, Daniel and I talked about the fact that in Wisconsin that they passed a constitutional amendment that you should know who's voting, that you identify yourself. And I told Daniel, I said, isn't this sort of strange and weird that you wouldn't assume that they would want to know who's voting? And it's a big issue. So, yeah, so that means that goes along with the people who have lost trust in government,
Right.
trust in the election. And that is, I think, a healthy trend when people wake up and say that. But the people who are demanding and are dependent on government, that's a different story.
Yeah, speaking of revolutions, I mean, the buzz online is loud. Calls to audit Fort Knox are trending, and President Trump said he wants to open the doors to see if the gold's really there. You were the original voice demanding transparency on this movement. Do you think we'll ever get transparency on America's gold reserves?
No, probably not. Because even if they open up and we say we're going to have 1,010 and they prove it and they show it to you, you don't know who owns it because that loan things out. That's a big business there. They're shifting that around and they use that as collateral. So I would say what they show you won't matter. The last time they pretended to have a audit in the 50s, I think it was in the 50s, it was totally inadequate. They probably looked at about 10% of the gold, then they just peeked in the door of the others. So, it would expose them too much. And that's why they don't want an audit of the Fed. When we had the Gold Commission, I introduced a resolution for the commission to audit the gold. There were 17 of us on the commission, and 15 voted say, "Oh no, we don't need to know. That'll just stir up financial problem. We don't want to scare people." So that's how crazy. So I don't hold my breath for it, even though I use that as a point to why they do this. Why do they not want us to know exactly what's happening with the finances? And the biggest thing that they protect is the information dealing with international business agreements. So the way the Fed behind the scenes will bail out countries. And I am sure there's trillions and trillions of dollars in the midst of a crisis where they bailing out everybody. And a lot of money is transaction, and they save some, the other, and not too many really go down because everybody has to be saved.
And Doctor, I mean, you've argued that the Fed wields enormous power over the economy, yet it operates in a black box, unaccountable to Congress or even the people. I mean, how can we push to audit the Fed, including, exposing Fed's monetary policy actions, foreign transactions, and even emergency bailouts that you just talked about?
Well, there's been some expression, Doge, that they should look into that,
Hmm.
as part of their project, but I'm not holding my breath. I don't think that's going to happen. Uh, because it's too complicated. There's too much behind the scenes. And then when you hear presidents endlessly giving us certain promises, then they get elected. And it's not too long after that that those promises don't mean much. And we find out, well, there's powerful special interests in the deep state and the
Hmm.
lobbyists, whether they're pharmaceutical or military industrial complex, they they can change the opinions of the people in power. So it's the whole system that's bad. I think it's the rejection of a system, the constitutional system, and I think there's a group that would like to seek out truth and find
Hmm.
out what's going on and talk about it. But that is canceled out by the majority of the people now are nihilists. There's so many in Washington, they would tell me point blank, you can't know those things. They're impossible to know. So we don't think there's a superior being, and they challenge everything, and that that doesn't solve the problem because they don't believe in truth. So if you want to talk about truth and money, you have not too many people listening.
Yeah, you called the Fed, and I like this quote, head of the hydra, as inflation fears return, doctor, and recession warnings continue to rise. What do you believe is their end game now?
For the Fed, what they're planning,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think if they have one, I don't think they can't follow it. But
Mhm.
I think it's protection of their special interests, the big guys. They get the protection, and they always throw the crumbs to the people. Welfare goes out to the poor, but they never keep up. The working man he has his unions and he has his salaries increase, but they never keep up with inflation. But
Mhm.
the people dealing in the billions and billions of dollars, they don't care about the price of bread. So that's the big difference. They just can do it, but it's the idea that there's too many people believe in intervention, that we need government to tell us what to do. And I don't believe in intervention in practically everything.
Mhm.
Maybe the murderers and killers, yes, but we have laws against that, and they work relatively well. Except we don't restrain the government from lying, cheating, and stealing and starting wars. They continue to do it, but the people are held in check. What happens if you counterfeit money? You go to prison. But now a sacred group of people in Washington can get together and decide and pretend they know how much money to print and what the interest rate should be and how are we going to handle the debt. And they're managing an unmanageable system. It's been tried many, many times over history. And I think what we're witnessing now is the signs that it's coming unglued. It's coming apart, and people aren't talking about the big picture of bankruptcy, and that's why they're not going to solve the problem until they
Mhm.
recognize the true bankruptcy of this country, and
Yeah.
that includes the moral bankruptcy of the country as well.
Yeah, not just the debt. Accountability, what a novel word and idea. Dr. Ron Paul, former congressman and founder of the Ron Paul Institute. Thank you for your insights, your conviction, and your decades of leadership on sound money and liberty, my friend.
Very good. Nice
Thanks,
being with
Dr.
you.
Paul. Thank you so much. And if you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell so you never miss an interview. I'm Jeremy Szafron. Thank you for watching Kitco News. Stay tuned. We'll see you next time.